Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the video blog Being the Marshmallow, Living and Coping with PTSD. This is the second episode in the blog, and this week it's going to be a two-parter because after a great many takes, I realized that I simply couldn't fit everything I needed to say on this particular very important aspect of discussing post-traumatic stress disorder into a single 15-minute segment. This week, I would like to talk to you about triggers. You're probably familiar with the term because it's been brought very much into the pop culture consciousness by a group of individuals that I like to refer to as the professionally butthurt. Okay, we all know of these people, and we probably even know personally a couple of them ourselves in our day-to-day lives. These are the people that anytime something is personally offensive or personally disagreeable to them, it's a trigger. Oh, you can't do that. That's a trigger. Oh, you can't have Mark Twain in the libraries because the N-word is in there, and that's a trigger. And no, okay, that's not it. What has happened is these people have co-opted and in the process diluted and declawed a very serious word that is central to an extremely dangerous and life-threatening medical condition, okay? I know I said in the first episode that PTSD is dangerous. I mentioned the fact that every 54 minutes, somebody with PTSD takes their own life. I myself have 4 suicide attempts under my belt, so I know what the hell I'm talking about in this respect. This is a dangerous disease, and when people go and take terminology associated with it and they water it down to mean, well, just stuff that I don't particularly care for, what they are doing is trivializing a medical condition and the terminology associated with it that affects the lives of millions upon millions of human beings around the world, and that has very serious personal consequences and very serious health consequences for those of us who have this disease. So, a trigger is not sexist language or something else that you might find personally offensive, okay? A trigger is not that. That is just stuff you don't like, and hey, welcome to adult life. Sometimes you got to deal with stuff that you don't particularly care for, okay? In its proper context and its proper definition, a trigger, excuse me, a trigger is stimuli which activates the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder or some other serious mental illness, okay? And there are probably as many triggers as there are people with post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? Because what it comes down to is you experience some sort of stimuli. That stimuli has psychological resonance with your trauma. And when you experience this, your symptoms go live. You may have been having a great week. You may not have had any symptoms all week long. Your condition is essentially dormant. You experience a resonating stimuli, and it activates or triggers your symptoms and sets them off, okay? Now, some common examples of triggers are, for instance, loud noises. Trauma is typically very violent by its very definition. Violence tends to be extremely loud. So loud noises are quite often a trigger. You know, you've probably seen the yard signs, "Veteran lives here, please be courteous with fireworks." That is because there's a psychological resonance to the noise and sights of fireworks and the combat theater where this guy who went over and served his country acquired his post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? There's a direct psychological link between these loud noises and these bright flashing lights in the sky and some extremely horrific experiences that this guy had when he was over in theater, okay? That's one example. Being grabbed or being surprised from behind is another very common one, because you typically don't see a traumatic episode, a traumatic experience coming from 15 minutes ahead. You don't block it out on your personal day planner. It's normally something like an assault or a car accident, something that comes out of you out of the blue, and so you associate being surprised with a potentially life-threatening moment. And so as a result, being surprised, being startled tends to activate the symptoms. Okay, there can be other things. Let's say hypothetically you were in a house fire and you have your PTSD because your house caught fire. The smell of smoke will probably be a trigger for you. Just one example right there. Now, the first thing I want to get into is the importance of identifying your triggers and why it is important to do so. Now, the way you do that is you actually do it kind of reactively, if you will. What happens is you have a symptomatic episode, and after the symptoms have abated and you are calmed down and you have taken time to practice your self-care, you analyze what was happening, what was going on in the moments immediately before your symptoms activated. Okay, so you get to a safe place, you calm down, you have a drink, you practice some breathing techniques, and you're like, okay, well, let's see here. I had a flashback. What was going on? Oh yeah, that's right. My wife was in the kitchen and she dropped a bunch of pans, and then that was the last thing that I remember until I came out of the flashback. Okay, one example, and there can be many, many like that. And what you do is you do this every time you have a symptomatic episode for as long as it takes. And there's no hard, fast number. There's no, too many or too few. You basically keep at it until you have developed what you personally believe is an accurate library or database of these triggering stimuli. That's how you do that. The reason it's so important is because you want to be able to limit the impact of the disease on your life, okay? You want to limit the severity to which the triggers set off your condition. And one of the ways that you do that is by identifying these things, so you can kind of armor up, if you will, okay? You can kind of put on psychic armor and go, for instance, I'm going to be going out to dinner with my friends and my family, and there's going to be a lot of people around, and having people moving around on either side of me is a triggering stimuli because of the fact that I got jumped and I got assaulted, and so people moving around suddenly around me, it activates my symptoms. So I'm going to brace myself for that, and I'm going to practice preemptive calming techniques so that this doesn't hit me out of the blue, and it's harder for the disease to get its teeth into me when this starts happening. And you can plan accordingly. Okay, fine, I'm going out to this restaurant. I will have less likelihood of going actively symptomatic if I sit at a table with my back to a wall. This is very, very common for people who have PTSD to do. We very, very frequently sit with our back to a wall, whether it's at home or on the bus or in the movies or when we're dining out, because, again, being snuck up on, being surprised from behind is a trigger for a lot of us. And so we plan things accordingly because we've identified that particular trigger. And you can do that with any trigger at all, okay? You can find some way to armor up against it once you have identified it. And you can also work with your caregiver, your therapist, in kind of finding coping techniques on how to reduce the severity with which it affects you if it manages to get through that psychic armor that I was just talking about. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to identify the triggers. Another reason is because you want to be able to communicate what they are to other people. Now, please understand that I am not suggesting that you should open every new relationship with, "Hi, my name is Bob, I have PTSD, and here's a laundry list of the things that set me off." No. What I'm talking about is you should be able to calmly and rationally communicate what your triggers are to other people in order to help them avoid inadvertently setting them off, okay? Human beings are an amazing species. We've done some really mind-boggling things. We have launched spaceships into space, landed them on comets that were in motion, and driven them around the comet, taking pictures that we sent back home, okay? And this is from a species that didn't have manned flight 200 years ago, and now we're doing this. But for all of the wonderful things that we do, we're none of us psychic, okay? We can't know a thing unless it is communicated to us, all right? And most people, I find, are genuinely good, genuinely decent people. They don't want to do something which is going to bring psychological and possibly physical harm to another person. And if they're aware of where the personal boundaries are, they will do their best to stay on the correct side of them. But they can't do that if you don't open your mouth and don't say, "Please don't do this. It is kind of an issue for me. Please don't sneak up on me. Please let me have the seat at the table that puts my back to the wall. Please don't tug my hair." For me personally, having my hair pulled is a major, major trigger because I have my post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of childhood abuse that included having my hair pulled, because pulling somebody's hair hurts like hell and it doesn't leave marks you can take to the cops and say, "Look, here is tangible proof of child abuse. Please get me the hell out of this situation." Okay? But, my wife or my friends, they can't know, "Don't pull on this," unless I open my mouth and say, "Please don't do that." Okay? That is why you want to be able to communicate that to other people. Also, in your professional life, if you want your boss to accommodate your condition, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you have an absolute legal right to what is known as reasonable accommodation for your PTSD. I'll be getting into disabilities rights and everything in much greater detail in a future post, but for right now, suffice to say that while you are under no legal obligation to reveal that you have PTSD or indeed any other medical condition to a prospective employer, if you want the reasonable accommodation, which is your right under federal law, you have to kind of reveal some of the ways in which that accommodation should manifest. Things like, "Don't assign me a workstation with my back to the door," stuff like that. Okay. People cannot work with you and they cannot meet you halfway if they don't know what halfway looks like, and they certainly can't stay on the safe side of the lines if they don't know where the lines are. We're under no obligation to share the fact that we have this condition with anybody, but it's not reasonable to expect people to just, hey presto, magically know that we have it without us telling them, and without us telling them what being considerate actively looks like. And that is where I'm going to end this segment. And we'll continue in part 2 and possibly part 3, because this is a very important subject and it's very, very crucial to the dialogue of PTSD and to understanding what it is and how to live and cope with it. So, see you next time.